Harlem, New York City. The 1960s were a turbulent time here. Poverty, racism, and crime all mixed together on the crowded streets. Out of this world would rise one of the most infamous figures in American drug history. His name was Frank Lucas, and his story would change the drug trade forever. Frank Lucas was not born into wealth or influence. He came from La Grange, North Carolina, in 1930, one of many children in a poor black family living under the harsh realities of the Jim Crow South. From a young age, Lucas learned what hunger felt like and what it meant to live with nothing. He often claimed that his motivation for crime came the day he saw his young cousin murdered by the Ku Klux Klan for merely looking at a white woman. That day, he said, lit a fire inside him, a fire of anger, ambition, and the determination never to feel powerless again. At just 15 years old, Frank Lucas ran away to New York City. Harlem was alive with culture, jazz, and business, but beneath the surface, it was also a hotbed of crime. Lucas, young and hungry for power, was drawn into this world almost instantly. He began with small crimes, robbing, hustling, and doing whatever it took to survive. It wasn't long before Lucas caught the attention of a man who would shape his future, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Johnson was already a legend in Harlem, known as the unofficial godfather of the neighborhood. He ran illegal gambling dens, controlled numbers rackets, and held influence in both the criminal world and the community. Unlike many other gangsters, Bumpy Johnson carried himself with intelligence and style. He was respected by Harlem residents, feared by his rivals, and had strong political connections. Frank Lucas became Johnson's driver, bodyguard, and apprentice. He watched, listened, and absorbed everything. From Bumpy, Lucas learned discipline, strategy, and the art of running a criminal empire. But more than anything, he learned that the real power in the drug trade came not from being flashy or violent, but from being smart, calculating, and ruthless when necessary. When Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack in 1968, Harlem was left without a clear leader. For Frank Lucas, this was both a tragedy and an opportunity. He saw a gap in power, and he intended to fill it. But unlike others, Lucas had no interest in being a middleman or paying tribute to the Mafia. He had bigger plans. This is where Frank Lucas's story becomes legend. Instead of buying heroin from the Mafia, who controlled most of the U.S. supply, Lucas decided to go straight to the source, the Golden Triangle of Southeast Asia. At the height of the Vietnam War, that region, bordering Laos, Burma, and Thailand, was producing some of the world's purest heroin. Lucas traveled to Bangkok, Thailand, where he built connections with a man known as Leslie "Ike" Atkinson, a U.S. Army sergeant who helped him reach local suppliers. This connection gave Lucas access to heroin that was nearly 100% pure, far stronger than what competitors were selling in New York. With this product, Lucas planned to dominate the streets. But how would he get it into the United States without detection? This is where one of the most famous and most controversial legends of his empire begins. Lucas later claimed he used the coffins of fallen American soldiers to smuggle heroin back from Southeast Asia. According to his own account, heroin was hidden inside the wooden caskets of soldiers being flown back to the U.S. However, some investigators have disputed this claim, saying it was likely smuggled in false compartments of cargo planes instead. Whether entirely true or exaggerated, one thing was certain. Frank Lucas had found a way to bypass the Mafia, cut out the middlemen, and bring heroin directly from the source. This made his product cheaper, purer, and far more profitable. He branded it Blue Magic, and on the streets of Harlem, it became infamous. By the early 1970s, Lucas's empire was unstoppable. He controlled the heroin trade across Harlem, New Jersey, and beyond. At its height, his operation was bringing in over $1 million per day. That's right, every single day. Frank Lucas became one of the richest drug dealers in America. He lived a life of incredible luxury. He bought mansions, expensive cars, fur coats, and even invested in businesses to appear legitimate. But despite the wealth, Lucas tried to keep a low profile, at least at first. He famously said that Bumpy Johnson warned him against being flashy, telling him to always sit down, be quiet, and watch. For a while, Lucas followed that advice. But money has a way of drawing attention, and soon Frank Lucas would make mistakes that even he couldn't cover up. Frank Lucas also had another side to his empire: fear. He demanded loyalty and punished betrayal with deadly consequences. Those who crossed him paid the price. His organization was run like a military unit, with trusted family members and close associates managing key parts of the business. He did not trust outsiders. Yet, in Harlem, some people saw him as a provider. He gave money to the poor, handed out turkeys on Thanksgiving, and supported the local community. To some, he was a Robin Hood figure. To others, he was a ruthless criminal who flooded the streets with heroin that destroyed countless lives. Both were true. By the mid-1970s, Frank Lucas had gone from a poor boy in North Carolina to the most powerful heroin dealer in Harlem. He had wealth, power, and influence that stretched from Asia to America. But with power came enemies, and with money came attention. Frank Lucas thought he was untouchable. But the truth was, law enforcement was watching. And soon, the walls would start closing in. At the height of his power, Frank Lucas believed he had built the perfect empire. His blue magic heroin was the purest on the streets, his network was strong, and his fortune was beyond imagination. But success attracts attention. And in the 1970s, Lucas had caught the eye of law enforcement. The same discipline and strategy that made him powerful also made him a target. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, was becoming more aggressive. Agents were under pressure to crack down on heroin that was devastating American cities. One man who would become central to Lucas's downfall was Richie Roberts, a Newark detective known for his honesty in a world filled with corruption. Roberts led a special task force with one mission: to take down the heroin trade flooding New York and New Jersey. For a while, Frank Lucas managed to stay under the radar. Unlike many flashy gangsters, he tried to keep his wealth quiet. But in 1971, during a boxing match at Madison Square Garden, Lucas made a mistake that would haunt him. He arrived wearing a long, full-length chinchilla fur coat and matching hat, gifts from his wife. The coat alone was worth more than $100,000. Sitting in the front row, surrounded by celebrities, Lucas suddenly stood out. To investigators watching the event, the man in the fur coat became someone to watch closely. That single night helped bring him into focus. Soon, federal agents were following him, tracking his movements, and connecting the dots. They noticed luxury homes in New Jersey, cars worth small fortunes, and bank accounts that did not match any legitimate business. They began watching his family and associates. The image of a quiet, disciplined businessman began to crack. In 1975, the DEA launched a massive raid. Over 400 federal agents and police officers surrounded Lucas's New Jersey mansion. Inside, they found piles of cash hidden in every corner. Some reports claimed it was over $500,000. Others believed millions more had already been moved. Along with the money, they uncovered drugs, weapons, and evidence linking him to a wide network of trafficking operations. The kingpin of Harlem was finally in custody. Lucas was charged with federal and state drug violations. At first, his future looked grim. The court sentenced him to 70 years in prison, a punishment that should have ended his empire forever. But Frank Lucas was not finished. He saw a way out. From behind bars, Lucas made a bold move. He chose to cooperate with law enforcement. He provided names, contacts, and information that exposed corruption at the highest levels of police and government. His testimony helped take down dozens of drug dealers and crooked officers. Because of his cooperation, his sentence was reduced. After serving only about 5 years, Lucas was released from prison in 1981. But freedom did not mean redemption. Old habits die hard. Lucas soon returned to dealing, unable to let go of the life that had once made him powerful. In 1984, he was arrested again for drug-related charges and sent back to prison, this time for 17 years. The empire he had once controlled was gone. Competitors had moved in. The streets had changed. And the legend of Frank Lucas was fading. When he was finally released in the early 1990s, Lucas was no longer the kingpin of Harlem. He was an older man with health problems, struggling to adapt to a world that had moved on without him. He lived quietly, sometimes speaking about his past, sometimes defending his choices, and sometimes expressing regret. He admitted that heroin destroyed lives, but argued that he only did what others were doing, just on a bigger scale. Frank Lucas's story did not disappear, though. In 2007, Hollywood brought his empire back into the spotlight. The film American Gangster, starring Denzel Washington as Lucas and Russell Crowe as Detective Richie Roberts, retold the rise and fall of his heroin empire. The movie reignited interest in his story, cementing him as one of the most infamous drug lords in American history. Frank Lucas passed away in 2019 at the age of 88. By then, he had lived long enough to see his name turned into legend, his crimes turned into cautionary tales, and his life debated as both ruthless and remarkable. To some, he was a brilliant businessman who outsmarted the Mafia and law enforcement. To others, he was a criminal who poisoned communities and left behind devastation. His empire is gone. His fortune long disappeared. But his name lives on as a reminder of how power and greed can build an empire, and how quickly it can all come crashing down.